Good afternoon, everyone. This is Andrew Snorton with Creative Community Solutions in partnership with Status Network. As you're aware, our coverage ranges from arts and entertainment, sports, community, as well as government and politics. We are excited to have Congressman Hank Johnson join us as we're going to have just a good conversation regarding some of the recent events that have taken place, especially the Supreme Court, as well as some of the moving parts that he's working on in order to help get a better grasp of the situation. As a reminder, our article will be available on the website asnortonccs.com/blog, and we'll provide the info regarding the video that we are sharing. So without further delay, Representative Hank Johnson, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay. Before we get into your initial response, the current response, and the moving parts you're working on, could you give us a point of reference, the district that you represent, as well as some of the committees that you serve?
Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today. Thanks for having me on. And I am Hank Johnson. I represent Georgia's 4th Congressional District in the United States Congress, where I have served for the last 17 years. I currently serve on the Judiciary Committee and also the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee.
Okay, and thank you so much for making us aware. So again, for people who might not be aware, you're allowing people to have an improved point of reference. Last Thursday, to say that it made the general public pause is an understatement. In your response, you noted, I'll say, a trend as to what's going on with the Supreme Court. You mentioned the Dobbs decision from last year. So speak with us when you received the news regarding the Supreme Court decisions, whether it was ranging from race in regards to admissions or in regards to the student loan situation. Walk us through what was your initial response when you heard, and reaction when you heard that news?
Yeah, my reaction was that this is an extreme activist right-wing United States Supreme Court, which is doing exactly what the makers of this court expect of it. This has been a 40-plus year effort by right-wing extremists, corporate crony capitalists, to capture the United States Supreme Court and to cause it to issue rulings that can't be accomplished by the legislative branch or enacted by the executive branch. So this Supreme Court is composed of 9 justices, none of whom are directly elected by the people. They are basically unaccountable to the people. They were nominated by extreme, in 3 cases, an extreme right-wing MAGA Republican, the head MAGA, as a matter of fact, Donald Trump. He appointed 3 of these extreme right-wing justices. The other 3 extremists were appointed by other Republican presidents, and they were confirmed by the United States Senate. The last 3 under the authority of Mitch McConnell, who controlled the Senate at the times they were confirmed. And so this court was put together by the Federalist Society. All 6 of these justices are a part of the Federalist Society, which began back in 1982 with the express purpose of shaping the court into what it is today. And so the rulings last week demonstrated to me that this court will do whatever it takes in order to arrive at and achieve the decisions that their corporate backers expect of them. But it was still shocking to see this court declare affirmative action as unconstitutional. It was shocking to see the court use the Equal Protection Clause, which was enacted back in, I think, 1869, in response to the inability of freed persons, freed slaves, to achieve equity in this country. And so the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which guaranteed due process and equal protection under the law, was ratified. But it took 100 years before the United States Supreme Court saw fit to give life to the Equal Protection Clause insofar as Black people are concerned. And it did so in the case of Brown versus Board of Education. And it declared segregation of the races inherently unequal. And so it declared that we must desegregate society with all, specifically the schools, with the public schools, with all deliberate speed. But of course, there was nothing but a molasses-like response to that Supreme Court ruling. Yes, we did make a lot of progress as a people under Brown versus Board of Education, but the court, in its decision last week in the affirmative action cases involving Harvard University and the University of North Carolina, gutted affirmative action, pretty much declaring that it's equal protection under the law protects the same folks who have historically enjoyed privilege at our expense, at the expense of Black people in this country, Black and Brown people in this country. And so it turned precedent on its head. It distorted the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, and it did so in response to the right-wing MAGA philosophy that predominates politics today in the Republican Party. So these are Republican-appointed justices, and they achieved a Republican objective, which has been long held, which is to do away with affirmative action. And it's quite alarming, but we will continue to fight.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate how you've provided not only the historical context, but the contemporary context regarding this has been something that's been in the works as I was jotting down a few of my notes. Now, one of the things that you've spoken to, and you've spoken to this previously earlier this year, and probably even last year, is looking at expansion of the Supreme Court. Walk through with us why you think expansion can be a good idea.
Well, justices on the Supreme Court have tenure that lasts for their lifetimes, even though the Constitution simply notes that justices should serve during good behavior. Doesn't say anything about lifetime tenure, but society, American society, has always held that federal court judges, including Supreme Court justices, have lifetime tenure. And so assuming that we continue with that interpretation of the Constitution, it means that we have MAGA extremist Republican justices who are in their 50s, in some cases early 50s, and they will be around for the next 30 years, ruling in the way that their patrons expect them to. And they will be ruling at our expense. And so, even a guy like Clarence Thomas, who is 72, 73 years old, he still has another decade at least to serve on the court. If he wants to serve until he dies, he currently he has the ability to do so unless Congress would see fit to impeach him, which is not going to happen. If we can't impeach and convict and remove Donald Trump from office, then everybody is exempt from that particular remedy. Everybody of a certain class, I should say. So the only thing we can do at this point is to expand the court. Congress has the authority to do so. Congress has exercised that authority 7 times throughout the course of history, the last time being in 1869. So it's been 160 years since the court was expanded. At that point, the country had about 37, 38 million people. Now we have 330 million people, but we still have the same size Supreme Court. Time for change on the court is here for a number of reasons, but the biggest one is because of the ideological bent of this court. It's been captured by the MAGA extreme right-wing corporate interests. And if we don't expand the court, then we're stuck with this court, the highest court in the land, the final arbiter of what is constitutional or not constitutional. And this court, like it did in Dobbs, is taking us backwards, took us backwards in the affirmative action cases. It has ripped away the equal protection rights of the LGBTQ community, people in that community, because of the case 303 Creative versus Ellenus. That case green lights the ability of creators who own businesses to discriminate against persons of the LGBTQ persuasion. So this court, rather than expanding on rights of people, rather than expanding on freedom and liberty, is actually taking us back and taking away liberties. And if Black folks are not careful, under this court, we'll be back picking cotton. And so that's the reason why we need to expand the court. We need to do so now.
And I appreciate you again providing the contemporary context, the historical context, and as you said before, the last time the court was expanded was 1869. So even just looking at the piece of the last time it's been expanded, and it was expanded, quote, in response, we'll say, to the ever-needing changes, based on the ever-needing changes in society. Well, guess what? Like you said, you're dealing with the population now that's almost 9 to 10 times the size. So they're just by that alone, there's I'll say, reasonable understanding why that there is a call to expand just on population alone.
Yeah, it stands to reason that much has changed in this country over the last 160 plus years. It is much more diversified. It is younger. It is more technologically advanced. Everything about our society has changed. And in many cases, it's changed for the better. But with this Supreme Court sitting on its roost, high atop everyone else and unaccountable to the people, we're seeing it bestow prohibitions or protections on gun owners and prohibitions on state and local governments to regulate guns. I mean, we've had a very tragic and violence-marred July 4th holiday in America. one mass shooting after another all across the United States of America. And we would not be having these mass shootings if we did not have so many guns on our streets. And the reason why we have so many guns on our streets is because politicians have yielded to the National Rifle Association, the NRA, which supports gun manufacturers. And so only thing they want to do is sell more guns. And so if you get politicians that allow for the proliferation of guns on our streets, as we have had, then the result is the violence that we see, the gun violence that we see. And so no longer should the theory that the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, that does not hold any water anymore. Everybody has a gun, and what it produces is more gun violence. So more guns does not make us safer. More guns makes us less safe. And the more guns, the less safe. And so therefore, we need a Supreme Court that will allow state and local governments and the federal government to control the flow of guns onto our streets so that we can get a handle on this violence. And other things we need a Supreme Court to do is to guarantee that our federal government can adequately fund healthcare and education, because public education and healthcare are always on the chopping block of Republicans, and therefore on the chopping block of a increasingly politicized United States Supreme Court.
Okay. So let me ask you this, as we get ready to kind of wind down, and you've done a great job of articulating, again, the historical context, the contemporary context, the need for making constructive change. For anyone who is in your district or just in general who feels like, what can I do, or I don't know what to do, what would you want to say to those individuals who have a want to be a more proactive, more engaged part of the process, but they just don't know where to start? What would you want to say to those individuals?
Well, I have to think about my good friend and mentor, Congressman John Lewis, at that question. And he used to talk about how important the vote is, that it's almost sacred. And so, people need to take that guidance to heart, understand that if we want to make change, we've got to vote. And we've got to vote in our interest. We don't need to vote against our interest. And so we need to be educated voting. We need to understand that it is the Republicans who have installed this United States Supreme Court, which is taking away the rights that the legislative branch doesn't have the power to do. But certainly this Supreme Court has the power to do, and is doing it. And so if you want to change the Supreme Court, you've got to change you've got to make sure that we maintain the Senate in Democratic hands. And so we have 2 Democratic senators from Georgia. Everyone needs to be registered, and everybody needs to get out and vote for those 2 Democrats. The next time one of them will come up will be 2026, when John Ossoff comes up for re-election. And we'll need to be ready to vote for him. We also need to make sure that we go out and vote for a president who will nominate justices like Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first Black female appointed to serve on the United States Supreme Court, and she is serving with distinction. We could use 8 more justices with the power of her intellect and experience coming onto that bench, and the heart for justice that she has. And so it's important in 2024 that people get out and go vote, and vote for Joe Biden, vote for Democrats up and down the ballot, not just on a national level, but on the state and local level. And don't fall for the okey doke that you need to get off of the plantation and therefore vote Republican. If you get off the plantation, you know, I mean, let's face it, we own the plantation. Democrats would not be in charge if it were not for Black folks. And so what we have to do is vote. We have to be who we vote for. And those who we vote for who are Democrats, we have to make sure that they reflect our values. And they do to a much greater extent than any Republican at this time can, because they are all MAGA Republicans. All Republicans follow the MAGA philosophy. If they don't, then they are booted out of their party. And so, you know, if you want MAGA Republicans to rule, if you want Donald Trump to get in and take over your democracy and deprive you of every right that you ever thought that you had, then, you know, go vote for Donald Trump. I don't know why you would. I don't know why you would vote for anyone who supports him. But if that's I hope you don't vote if that's the way that you will vote. But I hope that everyone will vote, be educated in their vote, and vote for the right candidates. And at this point, you know, I can proclaim that the straight ticket Democrats is the best way to go. So if you want to do something, then you need to get registered and you need to vote Democrat, and you need to make sure that your household and your friends and people in your community are also registered, and that they vote the way that they need to vote so that we can protect the rights of us all.
Well, I tell you what, Congressman Johnson, and one thing I can always say is that whenever I've asked a question, you have been a straight shooter, provided a straight answer. And I'm glad what you shared in regards to being informed, being educated, making sure to check your voting status, and make, like you said before, make the most informed decision that you can. I also appreciate during our time the points of reference that you're able to provide from a historical context, a contemporary context, and if there aren't any other takeaways, understanding that the way that the Supreme Court is currently constructed, there's going to be a certain philosophy, a certain ideology that is going to be present for an extended period of time. And in order to, I'll say, stem that tide, for lack of a better term, there's a population rationale regarding expanding the court. But then to see what can be done to provide a better sense of balance, that there is a clear call. And like you mentioned, based on what happened last year in 2022, which has happened last week, if people didn't get the memo, hopefully they are getting the memo. So at this point, Congressman, before we close, remind us the best ways that your constituents, those in your district and in general, can stay engaged and informed of the work that you are doing.
Yeah, you can go to hankjohnson.gov and sign up for my newsletter. We'll keep you informed as to what's happening. If you want to follow me on the social media at Rep Hank Johnson or at Elect Rep Hank Johnson. You can follow me there. You can support my efforts. You can learn about what I'm doing. In addition to expanding the United States Supreme Court, I've also introduced legislation that would create term limits for the United States Supreme Court, 18-year term limits. And also I've introduced legislation that would force the court to adhere to a code of conduct. Currently, there's no code of conduct to regulate the rulings of Supreme Court justices. And so I've filed legislation that will, that if it's passed, it would force the Supreme Court to adopt a code of conduct for itself. And if we want to make sure that those things happen, I have to have Democratic partners in the House of Representatives. And so we need to vote for Democratic representatives in the House throughout the state and throughout the country. That requires people to be registered. You need to register, you need to vote, and you need to vote Democrat. And that's the best way, the simplest thing that I can tell you that you can do. And I thank everyone for listening.
Well, again, as we conclude, Congressman, as always, thank you so much for taking time, whether it's been press conferences that I've been able to attend within the district, even today's conversation. I appreciate you sharing your time, sharing your insight, and giving people a point so they're seeing more of the moving parts. But even as you concluded, making sure that just the fundamentals of being involved in the voting process and being as engaged and educated as possible, those are things that go a long way. So we thank you once again for your time. Again, as a reminder, you can catch the full article on our business page, acenortonccs.com/blog. It will be the very first article that you see, and our video talk that you'll see that you've watched today, it will actually be an embedded YouTube link. So that way, not only will it be within the article, but then we can always get that out based on our YouTube channel. So again, we thank you so much for your time, Congressman. To all you've heard directly, you have some things to think about and reflect, and go ahead and make some positive things happen. So thank you so much, Congressman. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Snorton.